What would you do if the person you married was a stranger you were never meant to love, but couldn't stop falling for? The night was cold enough to turn breath into ghosts. A car wound its way up the narrow mountain road, headlights slicing through mist that hung low like a veil. Inside sat Elena Ward, her hands clasped in her lap, knuckles white, eyes fixed on nothing. The radio whispered a classical tune, but she wasn't listening. She was on her way to marry a man she had never met. Outside, the storm gathered strength. Snow tapped against the glass like a warning. The driver, sent by her father, didn't speak. He didn't need to. This wasn't the kind of journey that called for conversation. Elena's mind replayed her father's words, stern, measured. Final, to contract, Elena, not a romance. This marriage will protect our name. The words had echoed through the Ward estate earlier that morning, bouncing off marble floors and walls lined with old portraits, faces of ancestors who looked equally cold and unyielding. The Wards were a family built on legacy, not love. And the man she was to marry, Damien Blackwell, was their key to survival. His name carried the weight of power. His fortune came from old money, his reputation from a lifetime of silence. The Blackwells didn't mingle with the world, they owned pieces of it. And now, through ink and signatures, their empire would merge with hers. But what no one spoke of, what lingered like an uninvited ghost, was the rumor. The one that said Damien Blackwell had buried his first wife under a sky that refused to rain. When the car finally pulled up before the Blackwell estate, the gates opened with an eerie mechanical groan. The mansion rose before her like something out of another century, stone walls, scarred by time, windows dark and expressionless. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress. Inside, the warmth did little to ease the chill. The butler, a tall, pale man with a quiet voice, led her to a drawing room where the fire crackled weakly. On the mantel, portraits stared down, faces as severe as the stone that built them. Then she saw him, Damien Blackwell. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. He turned when she entered, slowly, deliberately, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. His eyes were sharp, assessing, not cruel, but cold, like he'd spent his life studying people only to decide they weren't worth knowing. Elena Ward, he said, his voice low. Even your early Sherma smiled, unsure if it was a test. Would you have preferred I was late? He didn't answer. Instead, he studied her the way one studies a contract, measuring its flaws, its risks, its value. The ceremony was held in the mansion's private chapel that night. No guests, no vows of affection, only signatures, witnessed by silence. The snow outside thickened, swallowing the world whole. When it was done, Damien simply said, "My room is at the end of the west wing. Yours is across the courtyard. We'll keep things simple." And that was it. No kiss, no promise. Just a paper that bound them tighter than any feeling ever could. For the first few weeks, their lives ran on parallel tracks. She spent her mornings walking the grounds, tracing the paths that wound through the frozen gardens. He spent his days locked in his study, surrounded by ledgers and letters. They dined together only when necessary, their words few and polite. It was less a marriage and more an arrangement of space. But still, something stirred. At night, she'd hear him pacing through the halls long after midnight, the soft creak of floorboards marking his restlessness. Once, she caught sight of him standing in the garden, shirt sleeves rolled up, head tilted toward the sky as snowflakes melted against his skin. There was something human in that moment, something raw, and it unsettled her. One morning, she found herself in the library, tracing the spines of old books when Damien walked in unexpectedly. She turned to leave, but he stopped her with a quiet question. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" His voice wasn't cold this time, it carried something else. Curiosity, maybe, or challenge. "My father," she said simply. He made it clear it wasn't a choice. Damien nodded slowly, eyes on the fire. "Then we're the same." That sentence stayed with her. Later, she discovered the truth hidden in whispers from the servants. The Blackwell fortune wasn't as unbreakable as people believed. Damien had inherited debt cloaked in dignity. The marriage wasn't just about merging empires, it was about survival for both of them. And yet, the more she learned, the more she saw a man trapped by the very world that worshipped his name. His study held letters from creditors, ledgers filled with red ink, a portrait of his late wife turned face down on the desk. One evening, as a storm battered the windows, she found him there again, staring into the fire. "She died in this house," he said quietly, not turning to face her. "My wife. People said I killed her." The flames flickered, throwing his shadow across the wall. "Did you?" she asked. He looked at her then, eyes haunted but steady. "No, but I might have driven her to it." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that feels alive. After that night, something shifted. Their conversations grew longer, their dinners less formal. He began asking her about her past, the things she missed, the dreams she'd buried under her father's expectations, and she in turn began to see the man behind the mask. It started small, a shared smile over breakfast, a walk in the garden as spring began to thaw the earth. But desire, when it comes, rarely announces itself. It slips in quietly, like light through cracks in old stone. One evening they found themselves in the conservatory. The air smelled of damp earth and jasmine. She was reaching for a book when he stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. The touch was brief, but it burned. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. From that moment, the walls of the Blackwell estate began to feel less like a prison and more like a secret. Yet even as warmth crept in, shadows lingered. Letters continued to arrive in the dead of night. Doors that should have stayed locked began to open on their own. And sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, Alina would swear she heard a woman's voice whisper her name. One night, she woke to find Damien standing at the foot of her bed, his expression unreadable. "There's something you should know," he said, voice barely a whisper, "about why you're here." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, eyes darting to the darkened window. "This marriage, it wasn't only for business. There's something my family didn't tell yours." The air seemed to thicken. "What is it?" Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the hollow, sharp, distant crash, like glass shattering somewhere deep within the house. Damien's head snapped toward the noise. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the corridor, his footsteps fading into the dark. Alina followed moments later, the cold stone floor biting against her bare feet. The house seemed alive, now, the wind groaning through its bones, the firelight flickering through cracks. She moved through the corridors until she reached the main hall. There, on the floor beneath the grand staircase, lay a broken vase and a trail of water leading toward the west wing. She hesitated, glancing up the stairs. A figure stood there, a woman, dressed in pale silk, her hair long and loose. For a heartbeat, Alina thought it was a reflection, a trick of the moonlight. But then the woman turned her head, and Alina saw her face. It was the face from the portrait in Damien's study. The face of his dead wife. The woman's lips parted as if to speak, but before any sound came, the light flickered out. When it returned, she was gone. Alina stood frozen, her breath coming fast, her heart hammering against her ribs. Somewhere above, a door slammed shut. She turned slowly toward the west wing. The silence pressed in like a weight, and from the darkness she heard Damien's voice, quiet, distant, almost broken. "Alina, you weren't supposed to see her." Then everything went still. The fire crackled again, faint and weak, as if struggling to stay alive. Outside, the snow began to fall once, more soft, silent, endless, and in that moment, standing alone in the hall of her new home, Alina realized something chilling. Whatever secret this marriage had been built on, it wasn't just about power. It was about something far more dangerous, something buried, something waiting to be uncovered. And the man she was beginning to desire might be the one who buried it. The silence after Damien's words stretched so long it began to feel alive. Alina's breath clouded in the cold air, her pulse thrumming beneath her skin. The house, vast and ancient, seemed to listen with her its walls, breathing faintly, its chandeliers trembling as if the ghosts inside it stirred awake. She took a step toward the west wing, where the darkness pooled thickest. The sound of her footsteps echoed off the marble, fragile and human. Somewhere above, a door creaked open, then closed again. She called out his name once softly, uncertainly. "Damien." No answer, only the sound of the wind pressing its hands against the windows. She found the corridor where the light faltered. The trail of water she had seen earlier glistened faintly, leading toward a door she had never noticed before, a narrow one, half hidden behind a drape. The handle was cold iron wrought, its surface rough under her touch. When she pushed it open, the hinges screamed in protest. A staircase descended into the dark. For a moment, she hesitated, then she stepped down. The air grew colder, damper, as she descended. The scent of stone and something faintly metallic filled her lungs. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered weakly, illuminating a narrow passage lined with old portraits, faces turned away, frames coated in dust. At the end of the corridor, a faint light spilled from a half-open door. Inside, she found Damien. He was standing before a large table covered in yellowed papers and ledgers. His hands braced against the wood. His head bowed. He didn't look surprised to see her, only tired. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said. "You said I wasn't supposed to see her." Her voice trembled. "What did you mean?" He looked up then, his eyes hollow. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" He turned away, staring at the wall where a faded family portrait hung. A younger version of himself stood beside a woman with dark eyes and a quiet smile. His first wife. "She didn't die the way they said," he murmured. "The doctors called it an accident. A fall down the staircase, but she'd been frightened for weeks before that. She said she saw things in this house, heard things. I didn't believe her." Elena's pulse quickened. "And you think that's what I saw tonight?" "I don't know what you saw," he said softly, "but I've seen it too." He crossed to a cabinet in the corner and pulled open the drawer. Inside lay a stack of old letters, tied with a faded ribbon. He handed them to her. The paper was fragile, edges browned with age. The handwriting was neat but shaky. "She wrote these before she died," Damien said. "I've read them 100 times. Every line feels like a warning I was too proud to hear." Alina unfolded one letter. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were clear. "The house remembers. It doesn't want me here. The sound comes from the west wing when you're asleep." Her hands trembled as she set the letter down. "You think the house is haunted?" Damien didn't answer. He poured himself a glass of whiskey instead, his movements mechanical, as if muscle memory was all that kept him grounded. I think, he said after a long pause, that guilt has a way of haunting us even when ghosts don't. Elena studied him quietly, the man she had been forced to marry, the man who now stood before her like a ruin barely held together. What are you guilty of, Damien? She asked. He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him she saw something raw flicker their fear. I didn't kill her, he whispered, but I made her feel invisible. And in this house, invisibility becomes a curse. The bulb above them buzzed, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Elena's heart leapt in the blackness. She heard the faintest sound, a whisper, close to her ear. It wasn't Damien's voice. She froze. Did you hear that? Damien's breath came sharp. Don't move, but it was too late. The air shifted, something brushed past her shoulder, cool and weightless. Then a crash, the letters scattered, the cabinet door swinging open as if struck by unseen hands. Damien lunged forward, grabbing her wrist, pulling her toward the stairs. We have to go now. They burst into the hall, the door slamming shut behind them with a thunderous crack. Elena turned, her chest heaving, eyes wide. What is that? I don't know, he said, voice ragged, but it's not a ghost. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The storm had returned, sweeping over the estate in a frenzy of wind and snow. Hours later they sat by the fire in the drawing room. The flames danced wildly, throwing their faces in sharp relief to people bound by fear and something deeper, neither dared name. Damien stared into the fire. After she died, I tried to leave this house. I made it as far as the gates before the car broke down. Every time I've tried since, something happens, an illness, an accident, the estate. It doesn't let go easily. Elena looked around at the shadows trembling across the walls. Maybe it's not the house holding you here. Maybe it's what you haven't faced. Her words hung between them, fragile as glass. Later that night, when Damien finally retired to his study, Elena wandered the corridors alone. The storm outside had eased, leaving a strange, silvery quiet. She paused before the portrait in the main hall, the one of Damien's first wife. The paint seemed almost alive, her eyes following Elena wherever she moved. And then, faintly, from somewhere behind the wall, came a sound, a rhythmic tapping, soft but deliberate. She pressed her ear against the cold stone. The sound grew clearer. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. She ran her hand along the edge of the portrait frame. Something clicked. The painting shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap in the wall. Behind it, the outline of a door. Her pulse raced. She pushed and the door creaked open to reveal a narrow passage lit by candlelight. The air was stale, but the candles were fresh. Someone had been here recently. She stepped inside. The passage wound downward, deeper into the heart of the mansion. At the end, she found a small room bare, except for a writing desk and a single chair. On the desk sat an open journal. The handwriting was familiar, the same as the letters Damien had shown her. She turned a page. If anyone finds this, tell him I forgive him. But he must not trust the man who calls himself his friend. Elena frowned. Below the words was a name barely legible under smeared ink, Lawrence Vane. She froze. Lawrence Vane. She had heard that name before, one of Damien's business partners, the man who had arranged the merger between the Wards and the Blackwells. Her father had spoken of him often. The next page was torn, but a few words remained. The documents, hidden beneath the chapel floor. A noise behind her made her spin around. Damien stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes wide. What are you doing down here? I found this, she said, holding up the journal. Your wife wrote about a man named Lawrence Vane. She said you shouldn't trust him. Damien stepped forward, took the book from her trembling hands, and read the page silently. His jaw tightened. Vane was my father's solicitor, he said. He's the one who arranged every contract, every merger including ours. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Then maybe this marriage isn't just about the families. Maybe it's about something else entirely. Damien looked up, his expression darkening. The chapel, he said. She mentioned the chapel floor. They moved quickly through the halls, lantern in hand. The mansion seemed to resist them, the air heavier, the doors harder to open. When they reached the chapel, the air was colder than ever, the moonlight pouring in through stained glass like fractured ice. At the center of the floor lay the marble dais where their marriage had been signed. Damien knelt, running his hands over the seams. Help me move this together. They pushed. The slab shifted, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a small wooden chest. Damien pried it open. Inside lay a stack of documents, property deeds, ledgers, and letters sealed with the Ward family crest. Elena's breath caught. That's my father's seal. Damien unfolded the top document. His face hardened as he read. Your father and Vane signed this 2 years ago, before your marriage was even discussed. It gives Vane full control over both our estates in the event of our union. She stared at him, disbelief flooding her. My father wouldn't, but even as she said it, she remembered the look in her father's eyes the night he told her about the contract. Cold, resigned, almost fearful. He would, Damien said quietly. And Vane's been playing both sides. Your father's debts, my inheritance, he tied them together. When the marriage was sealed, the control passed to him. Elena's knees weakened. So all of this marriage, the secrecy, it was orchestrated. He nodded slowly, and she found out that's why she died. The candles flickered violently as if the house itself shuddered at the revelation. Then came the sounds of deliberate footsteps echoing through the chapel. They turned. At the far end of the aisle, silhouetted against the stained glass, stood a figure in a long black coat. Lawrence Vane. His face was calm, almost kind. "You've both come further than I expected," he said. "But curiosity is a dangerous thing, Damien. I warned your wife of that once." Damien stepped forward, fury tightening his voice. "You killed her." Vane tilted his head. "Killed? No. The truth is simpler. She couldn't live with what she knew. Some secrets rot the soul." Elena's voice trembled. "You used us." He smiled faintly. "Used? My dear, I saved you. You're both relics of fading empires. I merely arranged their final union." Before either of them could move, Vane turned toward the door. "I'll be leaving now. I suggest you don't follow. The storm has a way of swallowing the unwise." He disappeared into the shadows. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The chapel felt heavier now, the air thick with betrayal and something darker. Finally, Damien turned to her. His expression had changed, no longer cold, no longer guarded. Only grief and resolve remained. "They took everything from us," he said, "but I won't let them have what's left." Outside, lightning split the sky. The storm raged once more, but this time, it didn't feel like the world ending. It felt like the beginning of something inevitable. Elena looked at him, her heart caught between fear and fire. "Then we fight." He nodded once, the faintest trace of something dangerous in his eyes. Together, and as thunder rolled over the mountains, the candles in the chapel flickered out, plunging them into darkness. In that black silence, something shifted between them, not just survival, not just truth, but a bond forged in the ruins of deceit. Yet neither of them knew that the house still listened. And it wasn't done with them yet. The storm raged until dawn. By the time the first gray light seeped through the cracks of the mansion's heavy curtains, the world outside had turned white and silent, as though the night's violence had never happened. Inside, the air still hummed with tension. The chapel doors had been bolted shut, the chest of documents hidden once more beneath the marble floor, and yet nothing felt secure. Every corridor, every flickering candle, seemed to whisper the same question: what now? Elena woke to the faint scent of smoke, not from the fireplace, but something older, deeper, like ash clinging to the air. She sat up in her bed, the sheets tangled around her. The silence pressed against her ears until she could hear her heartbeat. Down the corridor, a door creaked, then footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate. She rose quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Damien standing by the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. His hair was unkempt, his shirt half-buttoned, and his expression unreadable. "He's gone," he said softly. "Vane." The gates were opened sometime after midnight. The groundskeeper says he saw a carriage leave before the storm broke. Elena joined him at the window. The driveway below was half buried in snow, the tire tracks already fading beneath the morning frost. "Then he took the documents?" she asked. Damien shook his head. "No, they're still here." "That's what I don't understand." She studied him quietly. "Maybe he doesn't need them anymore." He turned to her, brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "If the contract already gave him control," she said, "then the papers were just a formality. Maybe he left them because his work is done." Her words hung in the cold air, heavier than truth. Damien looked away, his jaw tightening. "Not if I burn it all down first." He left before she could answer. That afternoon, the mansion seemed to wake with a different kind of life. Servants moved quietly through the halls, avoiding eye contact. Somewhere in the west wing, workmen hammered boards across windows shattered by the storm, but beneath the ordinary rhythm of repair, something darker pulsed, a tremor of unease that had nothing to do with the weather. Elena wandered through the study where the documents now lay spread across the desk. The ink, once black, seemed to glisten faintly, as if damp. She ran her fingers along the signatures, the curling loops of names that now felt like traps. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable, strong, deliberate. Yet beside it, faintly etched into the paper, she saw something else. Another name, faded but real: Lydia Blackwell, Damien's first wife. The ink shimmered faintly in the light, as if time itself had tried to erase her but failed. A chill rippled through Elena's body. Why would Lydia's name be on a financial document signed after her death? The answer came like a whisper at the back of her mind, because she never truly left. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Damien appeared again. He looked restless, his eyes shadowed. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You didn't tell me she was part of the contract," Elena replied. "Lydia's name is on one of the pages." He froze. "That's impossible." She handed him the paper. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unraveling. This wasn't here before." "You're sure?" He nodded, setting the paper down slowly. "I would have seen it. I went through every line." They both fell silent. Outside, the wind began to rise again, a low howl that seemed to circle the mansion like a predator. "Maybe she's trying to tell us something," Elena said. Damien looked at her sharply. "Don't start with that. She was trying to warn you, Damien. You said it yourself. The letter's a journal. She knew something about Vane, about the contracts." What if her death wasn't just because she found out? What if she was part of it? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. No, Lydia had nothing to do with this. She didn't care about the business or the estate. She hated everything about this place. Maybe that's why she wanted to destroy it, Elena whispered. Her words stopped him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Damien stepped closer, his voice barely audible. If what you're suggesting is true, then she's not haunting this house. She's haunting me. That night, Damien didn't sleep. Elena heard him pacing again back and forth, across the floorboards that creaked in rhythm with his thoughts. Near midnight, a faint sound woke her, the same whisper she'd heard before, soft as breath. This time, she didn't hesitate. She rose, following the sound through the hall and down the staircase to the drawing room. The fire was low, casting the room in amber light. And there, standing before the fireplace, was Lydia. Her pale silk dress shimmered faintly, her face serene but sorrowful. She wasn't translucent, not a phantom of mist and memory. She was solid, almost real. Elena froze. Lydia, the figure turned, eyes meeting hers. He doesn't remember, the voice said, soft but distant. He doesn't know what he promised. Elena's mouth went dry. What promise? But Lydia was fading now, her form dissolving like smoke. You'll find it, she whispered in the fire, and then she was gone. Elena stood alone in the flickering glow, her pulse racing. The fire crackled, scattering sparks across the hearth. She stepped closer, crouching. Something glinted in the ashes, small metallic. She reached in and pulled it free. A key, old, blackened by soot. By morning, Damien found her at the fireplace, the key clutched tightly in her hand. What's that? He asked. She came to me again, Elena said quietly. She said you made a promise. Something hidden in the fire. He looked at her, torn between disbelief and something deeper, fear, perhaps. Elena, she's dead. Then how do you explain this? She placed the key in his hand. He stared at it, turning it over slowly. The handle bore an engraving, a small crest, the shape of a cross entwined with ivy. He exhaled sharply. I've seen this before. It's the Blackwell crest. But this isn't for any door in the house. Then where? His eyes flicked toward the window. Beyond it, through the fog, the outline of an old stone structure stood apart from the mansion, the mausoleum. They went together after breakfast. The sky a pale, unforgiving gray. The air was heavy with the scent of thawing snow and iron. Inside the mausoleum, dust hung like mist. Stone slabs lined the walls, each bearing names from centuries past. At the far end stood a sealed tomb, the marble carved with Lydia's name. Damien's hands trembled as he fitted the key into the small lock beneath the inscription. It turned with a reluctant click. The slab shifted slightly, revealing a hollow space. Inside lay a small leather-bound box. Damien opened it, and a folded sheet of parchment slid out. Elena leaned closer. The handwriting was Lydia's. If this reaches you, then he has already come. Lawrence Vane is not who he claims to be. He carries our bloodline's secret, and he will use it to destroy us all. You must not let him find the chamber. Elena's breath caught. What chamber? Damien frowned, scanning the letter. She doesn't say. But this changes everything. Vane isn't just after the estate. He stopped suddenly, his gaze falling on a line near the bottom. The ink had faded, but the words were clear enough to read. Tell the girl from the north, she is the key. Elena felt her stomach drop. What? Damien looked at her, confusion written across his face. Lydia wrote this before she died. She couldn't have known you. She did, Elena whispered. My mother was from the north. She died when I was a child. My father never spoke of her family. Damien's face paled. Elena, what if this marriage wasn't about merging two empires at all? What if it was about binding something older? The wind howled outside, rattling the iron gates. The air in the mausoleum grew colder, pressing against their skin like ice. Elena stepped back, the edges of the world blurring for a moment as the weight of realization sank in. She wasn't just a pawn in her father's scheme. She was part of something far older, something that Lydia had died trying to protect. When they returned to the mansion, the hallways seemed darker. Shadows clung to the walls, the air heavy with anticipation. Damien said little, his mind racing. In the study, he laid the letter beside the documents, his eyes scanning the signatures again. Then he stopped. Elena, he said, voice trembling, look at this. She leaned over his shoulder. On the oldest of the deeds, one dated nearly a century before, was the same ivy cross symbol from the key. But beside it, carved faintly into the wax seal, was a second mark, a circle enclosing two interlocking initials. EW, her initials. She stumbled back. That can't be. It's not coincidence, Damien said quietly. Whoever Vane really is, he's been planning this for generations. And your family was part of it from the beginning. A clock struck somewhere in the distance, the chime echoing through the hall like a warning. Elena looked at Damien, her voice barely a whisper. Then what are we supposed to do? He turned toward her, his eyes dark with determination. We find the chamber before he does. Whatever Lydia was protecting, it's the reason we were brought together. Outside, the wind died suddenly, leaving the house in a terrible stillness. The kind of silence that feels like the breath before something breaks. And in that silence, the portrait of Lydia Blackwell hanging above the fireplace shifted on its own. A faint crack traced down the canvas, splitting her face in two. Alina stared, her heart pounding, as a sliver of paper slipped from behind the frame and drifted to the floor. Damien picked it up, his fingers trembling as he unfolded it. The paper was thin, the ink crimson. There were only 6 words written across it. "You are standing above the chamber." The floor beneath them groaned, and in that single shuddering instant, they both understood that house hadn't been waiting for them to find its secrets. It had been waiting to open. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint hiss of the dying fire, the soft moan of the wind against the windows. The slip of paper lay between them like a verdict. "You are standing above the chamber." The floor beneath their feet creaked again, almost imperceptibly, as if exhaling after a long sleep. Alina looked down at the dark wooden panels, her pulse quickening. "Here," she whispered. "It means here." Damien stepped closer, his expression tightening. "The study," he murmured. "This is where the first foundations were built. The heart of the house." Together, they knelt by the hearth, brushing away the rug that covered the center of the room. The planks were old, weathered, uneven. Damien ran his fingers along the seams until one section gave slightly under his touch. "There's something beneath it," he said. He fetched a crowbar from the corridor, and the sound of splitting wood cracked through the silence like thunder. Dust rose in spirals, catching the glow of the firelight. Beneath the broken boards lay stone a trapdoor, sealed with iron and carved with the same ivy cross crest that marked the key. Alina stared at it, her breath shallow. Lydia said not to let him find the chamber, but she didn't say why. Damien set the crowbar aside and touched the seal. "We're past warnings now." He turned the key. The lock clicked open with a sound too loud for the stillness that followed. A gust of cold air rose from below, carrying with it the scent of earth and something faintly metallic like old blood. They descended slowly. The stone steps spiraled down into darkness, the walls slick with damp. Their lantern light trembled as they moved, painting fleeting images across the wall's carvings, faint symbols half erased by time. "Alina," Damien whispered, his voice echoing faintly. "Look at this." He brushed away the dust from one of the carvings. It depicted 2 crests intertwined, the ward seal and the Blackwell ivy cross. Below it, an inscription in Latin, "Sanguine legati, bound by blood." Her heart thudded painfully. "My family and yours. This goes back centuries." They reached the bottom. The passage opened into a circular chamber, the air still and heavy. In the center stood a stone altar, cracked with age, surrounded by half-burned candles, long extinguished. Papers, bones, and rusted metal lay scattered like relics of some forgotten ritual. Alina stepped forward, her lantern sweeping over the scene. "It looks like they performed something here," she said softly. "But what?" Damien picked up one of the papers, the ink barely legible. "It's a covenant, between the first Blackwell and the first ward. They pledged a bond to protect whatever this is, but there's something else." His voice faltered. "They swore it would be renewed through marriage. Every generation." Elena's stomach turned cold, renewed. He looked up, the lantern casting hard shadows across his face. "Our marriage wasn't about power or inheritance. It was the renewal of an oath." The words hung between them like a blade. "But an oath to what?" she asked. Before he could answer, a distant sound echoed from above the unmistakable slam of a door. They froze. Then came footsteps, slow and deliberate, descending the staircase. Damien set down the lantern and moved toward the shadows. "Stay behind me," he murmured. The air thickened with the smell of rain and dust. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, from the stairwell, a voice smooth gone, unmistakable. "I warned you not to follow." Lawrence Vane appeared in the doorway, his coat dark with snowmelt, a pistol glinting faintly in his hand. His expression was almost gentle. "You should have left the past where it belonged." Damien's voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "What are you doing here, Vane?" "Finishing what your ancestors began," Vane said. "You think this chamber was built for protection?" "No, it was built for containment." Alina stepped forward, the light catching the sharp planes of her face. "Containment of what?" Vane's gaze turned toward her, almost pitying. "You, my dear, or rather, what runs in your blood." The air seemed to constrict around her. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother's lineage," Vane said quietly. "The northern branch of the Ward bloodline. They carried something, an inheritance that wasn't meant to survive. Power without discipline becomes corruption. The Blackwells knew that, so they built this place to seal it away. Every generation, the 2 families renewed the bond, your blood and his, so the secret would never surface." Alina shook her head, her voice breaking. "You're lying." Vane's eyes softened, but his voice remained steady. "You felt it, haven't you? The house responds to you. The storms, the whispers, the things that move when you dream." Damien turned sharply to her. "Alina," she took a step back, her mind reeling. Memories surged unbidden, the flickering lights that dimmed when she grew frightened, the voices that called her name in empty halls, the nights the fire roared without fuel. "No," she whispered, "that's not possible." Vane smiled faintly. "Denial is the first inheritance of the Ward line. They bound your ancestors to their power, and the Blackwells became their jailers. But your father was greedy. He tried to break the cycle. That's why he married you off, to keep you contained. The truth hit like a physical blow. She stumbled, gripping the edge of the altar for balance. Damien caught her before she fell, his arms firm around her. Enough, he said through his teeth. You've used us both long enough. You killed Lydia, didn't you? Vane's expression didn't change. She was foolish. She tried to open the seal before its time. I merely ensured the balance remained. Damien lunged forward, fury overtaking him. The gunshot rang through the chamber, deafening in its echo. The lantern shattered, plunging them into darkness. Elena screamed his name. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. In the faint glow of dying flame, she saw Damien stagger, clutching his shoulder. Vane's voice rose above the chaos, calm and precise. You can't stop it, Damien. The seal is breaking already. The house knows she's awake. The walls began to tremble. Dust rained from the ceiling, cracks snaking through the stone. The air grew colder, denser. Somewhere deep within the earth, a sound like a heartbeat began to pulse, slow, thunderous, alive. Elena's breath came in ragged bursts. What's happening? Vane turned toward her, his eyes gleaming with something like awe. The blood calls to its own. The heartbeat grew louder. The candles burst into flame, one by one, their light blinding. Symbols carved into the walls began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. Damien struggled to his feet, blood staining his sleeve. Elena, we have to get out now. But the doorway was already caving in, stone crumbling as if the house itself refused to let them leave. Vane stepped back, shielding his eyes from the light. It's too late. She's waking it. Elena turned to him, her voice trembling with fury and fear. What is it? He met her gaze, and for the first time, his composure cracked. The Covenant source. The thing your ancestors bound beneath this house. A force they couldn't destroy, only control. The floor split open with a deafening roar. Fire and wind surged upward, and for a heartbeat, Elena saw shapes moving in the light face's hands. Fragments of memory, thousands of souls, tangled together like roots beneath the earth. She fell to her knees, covering her ears. The sound was unbearable. Chorus of whispers, pleading, crying, calling her name. Elena. Damien shouted, grabbing her arm. We have to seal it. How he pointed to the altar where the crest of the two families glowed like molten gold. The Covenant, it's written in blood. It can be rewritten. Vane laughed, the sound sharp and echoing. You think you can undo what was forged by centuries of betrayal? Damien ignored him, pulling a dagger from the altar's edgy relic, its blade blackened with age. He pressed it into Elena's hand. It has to be you. You're the last of your line. The light from the floor intensified, a storm of golden red. Elena's hair whipped around her face, her eyes wide with terror. If I do this, what happens? Damien's gaze held hers, steady, unflinching. Either it ends or we all go with it. A tremor split the chamber again, knocking Vane to his knees. He tried to stand, but the force that filled the room pressed down on him like gravity itself. The altar began to crack, the stone glowing from within Elena. Damien shouted over the roar. Now she raised the dagger, hands trembling, her breath caught in her throat and brought it down on the crest. The blade struck stone, shattering through it. A blinding light exploded outward, swallowing the chamber. For an instant, the world went silent. When the light dimmed, Elena found herself standing in the same chamber, but everything was still. The symbols had gone dark, the wind had stopped, the heartbeat had vanished. Damien lay unconscious beside her, the wound in his shoulder still bleeding. Vane was nowhere to be seen. Only the faint scent of smoke lingered where he had stood. Elena dropped the dagger, her hands shaking. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the blade's surface, her eyes now a deeper shade, almost gold. The silence that followed was not peace. It was waiting. Then, from somewhere far above, came the sound of the mansion's great clock striking once, its toll echoing down through the earth. Elena turned toward the staircase, her pulse racing. The way out was open again. She reached for Damien's hand, whispering his name. He stirred, his fingers tightening weakly around hers. The air was thick with dust and fading magic. Every breath felt like it might shatter the fragile calm that had fallen. And as they began to climb, the final echo of the clock faded into nothingness. But before the silence settled completely, a faint voice, soft, familiar, almost tender, brushed against Elena's ear. You've broken the seal, my dear, but not the curse. Her blood ran cold, and for the first time, she realized the chamber hadn't been a prison for something else. It had been a prison for her. The morning after the storm was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The house stood battered but unbroken, its walls streaked with ash and rain. The once proud estate, which had loomed so dark and forbidding, now seemed humbled, a ghost of itself, stripped of pretense. The mist rolled low across the grounds, soft and gray, and the air carried the scent of wet stone and burnt wood. Elena stood at one of the broken windows, watching the fog swallow the edges of the fields. The light touched her face, pale and trembling, as though it were hesitant to return to this place. Behind her, Damien stood on the couch, his shoulder bandaged, his skin still pale from blood loss. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. How long have I been out? 2 days, she said quietly. You lost a lot of blood. He sat up slowly, wincing. His eyes found hers, searching for something that wasn't fear, perhaps forgiveness. And the house. She turned back to the window. It's asleep again, for now. The silence that followed was heavy but no longer suffocating. It was the kind of silence that comes after truth, when there's nothing left to hide behind. Outside, the wind brushed through the broken garden gate, whispering through the ivy like a sigh. Alina. Damien began. What happened down there? After the light, I remember nothing. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze lingered on the horizon where the fog was thinning, revealing a sliver of morning gold. The seal broke, she said at last, and when it didn't release what we thought. It released me, or rather, a part of me that had been chained since before I was born. He frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. I don't understand. She turned to him, and in that fragile light there was something different in her face, softer but not weaker. The curse wasn't about power, it was about memory. My family, they tried to bind away what they couldn't accept, emotions, truth, the parts of themselves they feared would destroy them. They locked them inside their bloodlines, generation after generation, until the burden became me. Damien's breath caught. And you freed it. I had to, she said, but freedom doesn't mean escape. It means living with what's been uncovered. The room fell silent again. The fire in the hearth had long gone out, leaving only the faint smell of smoke. The house seemed to listen, its restless presence subdued, almost content. For the first time since she had arrived, Alina felt it not as an enemy but as something ancient and wounded, a reflection of her own inheritance. She crossed the room, kneeling beside Damien. You once told me this marriage was a contract, she said softly. A cold transaction between two names. He nodded, eyes lowering. It was, and yet, she continued, somehow it became the one thing that saved us both. He met her gaze then, and for a moment the weight of everything between them, the deception, the fear, the bloodlines, the haunting dissolved into something simpler, something human. Perhaps that was the true covenant, he said. Not the one written in stone or blood, but the one written in choice. Alina smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. Choice, she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Outside, the sun began to rise higher, cutting through the mist. Light spilled into the ruined hallways, glinting off broken glass and fallen portraits. The house seemed to breathe again, each beam of sunlight a fragile act of forgiveness. Later that day, they buried the relics of the past, the torn documents, the shattered crest, the fragments of the altar in the orchard behind the house. The soil was damp and soft beneath their hands. Alina placed the iron key at the center of the grave before covering it with earth. Do you think it's really over? Damien asked quietly. She pressed the final handful of dirt down, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Curses don't end, she said. They change shape. What matters is what we do after. He stood beside her in silence. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet grass and faint smoke. From somewhere far beyond the woods, the faint toll of a church bell echoed a sound that felt strangely like absolution. That evening, they walked through the house one last time. The rooms were still dark in places, but no longer menacing. The air carried warmth again, faint traces of old perfume and dust and wood smoke, the remnants of lives lived and lost. Alina paused by the grand staircase, running her fingers along the banister. The wood was smooth, polished by centuries of touch. I used to think this place hated me, she murmured. Now I think it was just trying to remember itself. Damien joined her at the base of the stairs. And what about you? She looked up toward the landing, where light pooled like water. I think I've been trying to remember myself too. In the days that followed, they made plans to leave. The estate would be sold, its name restored, but its legacy buried beneath quiet soil. The storm had passed, but its memory would linger like a shadow stitched into sunlight. On the final morning, Alina stood at the edge of the property, the wind tugging gently at her coat. The fields stretched out before her, endless and open. Behind her, the house loomed in silence, its windows reflecting the sky like mirrors. For the first time, it didn't seem like a prison. It seemed like a witness, solemn, weary, and finally at peace. Damien approached from behind, his footsteps soft against the grass. Ready? He asked. She nodded yes, but I think I'll walk a while before the car. He understood without words. He kissed her forehead, then turned toward the gate, leaving her to the quiet. She walked into the orchard, where the soil still held the faint mark of the grave they'd made. The apple trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering. The air was warm now, the kind of warmth that follows grief, delicate, uncertain, but alive. She knelt beneath one of the trees, tracing a finger along its trunk. Beneath her touch, the bark felt like skin, scarred but living. We're both free now, she whispered. The wind rose again, rustling the branches until one apple fell, landing softly at her feet. She picked it up, turning it in her hand. It was small, imperfect, and red as blood. She smiled faintly and set it on the earth, leaving it there. As she stood, a thought drifted through her mind, not her own, but something older, fainter, like the echo of a voice that had once lived in the stones of the house. Every curse begins as love misunderstood. She closed her eyes, letting the wind move through her hair. That was the truth. She realized the curse had never been about punishment, but preservation. Every generation had tried to protect what they feared to lose, only to become trapped by their own devotion. Love had bound them, and it was love, in its quietest, purest form, that had finally set them free. When she opened her eyes, the fog had thinned completely. The world stretched before her, vast, golden, alive. She turned back one last time. The house stood silent beneath the rising sun, its broken windows glinting like facets of memory. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure at one of them, a woman in pale light, watching. Lydia perhaps, or a memory of herself, but when she blinked, the window was empty. A final gust swept through the orchard, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, distant, soft, familiar. And then, nothing but wind and the low hum of morning. Elena walked toward the road, her footsteps steady, the path before her uncertain but open. Behind her, the great house of the Blackwells and Wards faded into the mist, its story finally resting. The world felt new, yet ancient, as if every beginning was only another end rewritten. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the quiet, beneath the healing, a single question lingered, gentle but endless. If the heart remembers what the mind forgets, which of them truly holds the truth? As the sky brightened and the road stretched ahead, she didn't seek the answer. Some truths, she had learned, were meant to be lived, not solved. And with that quiet understanding, Elena Ward, last heir of 2 haunted names, stepped forward into the light, leaving behind the echoes of the house that had once held her captive, and now, finally, had let her go.